Good morning, board, staff, and members of the public. After my statement, the chairman will open this meeting and explain the rules for this electronic meeting. Please keep your microphone on mute when you are not speaking. The technical support team may proactively mute participants if the microphone is picking up background noise. Board members should check to make sure the microphone is not muted before speaking. You may text me at 540-336-3948 at any time during the meeting if you need technical support, and an IT tech will call your cell to assist. I now turn the meeting over to Committee Chairman Kelly.
Okay, thank you, Jewel. I'll open the meeting and I'll read a statement. In accordance with the Governor's State of Emergency Declaration, and executive orders regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors Continuity Ordinance and General Assembly 2020 Budget Amendments 28 and 137 Special Procedures. Loudwater will meet today in an electronic meeting. In compliance with these special procedures, only action items necessary to continue operations of Loudoun Water and the discharge of its lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities discussed during today's meeting. Reports and other meeting information are available on board docs. Public notice and meeting access information was provided on the Loudoun Water website. A recording of the meeting will be available on this link, www.loudounwater.org/virtual-meeting-recordings. Board members wishing to speak are reminded to press unmute and identify themselves by name so that staff can accurately capture comments. All items will be recommended to the June 10th, 2021 board meeting. The board secretary will now take a roll call on attendance of the committee members.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Kelly?
Present.
Mr. Sultan? I don't see Mr. Sultan joining, sorry. Mr. Bonfils?
Here, present.
Thank you. And Mr. Koblis?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, looks like we have a quorum. Jewel, thank you.
Yes, sir.
The first item is to approve the meeting agenda. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Approve?
So moved.
Second.
A second, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Aye.
And I
That
need to
passes,
take
Jewel.
a roll call vote.
Okay, you need
Mr.
to take
Kelly?
a voice go. Aye.
Yes, sir. Mr. Sultan? Nope. Mr. Bonfils?
Aye.
And Mr. Koblis?
Aye.
Unanimous. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Appears to be no action items on the agenda. I guess we'll start with the audit results. Let's turn it over to Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Good morning, members of the board. Today we'll be presenting to you the results of the 2020 audit. The audit was conducted by Yount, Hyde & Barbour, and joining us today from YHB is Jennifer Files. She'll be presenting to you the results, including all the required communications. And at the June meeting, we will present to the full board the annual report. As part of her results, she will be presenting 4 audit findings. They're not considered a significant deficiency or material weakness. And when she completes her presentation, I'll provide a status update on the implementation of those recommendations and findings. If there are no questions at this time, I will turn things over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning.
Good morning, Jennifer, and welcome.
Thank you, sir. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for allowing YHB to continue to be of service to the authority. I'd like to start just by thanking Carla, as well as Brian, Eileen, and the entire finance team, as well as Mike and his team within the IT department for all of their hard work. We certainly did, they did a lot of work to get ready for the audit, to get through the audit process, and did a wonderful job. So I'm very happy to be here to report the results of another successful audit. Again, this is our second completely remote audit cycle, which does present its own unique challenges to the process, but again, successful. So if you can advance to the next slide, what I've brought for you today, as Brian mentioned, are required communications and an overview of the process, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. All in all, we began our field work on March 22nd this year, and all of the audit processes and the field work and testing were completed through May 10th. That will be our report date this year. We will be issuing an unmodified, clean opinion on the financial statements of Loudon Water this year. That includes the business type activities of the entity as well as the fiduciary fund for the OPEB. We will also issue a report on internal control over financial reporting and compliance. This will also be a standard letter. As Brian mentioned, we did not identify any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in the internal control environment during this audit. We have reviewed the financial report to make sure that it still complies with the requirements of the GFOA Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. So we go through that process to make sure that all of the questions and changes that the GFOA present on an annual basis, that the report still complies with that. The APA specifications for audits of authorities, boards, and commissions, we also do compliance testing in this area. We did not identify any compliance findings through this testing. That testing includes things like deposits of cash, investments, the VRS census compliance. We test all of those areas in detail and had no issues there.
Excuse me for one minute. Hey, Joel,
yes,
this is Mark. This is Mark Koblis. I'm online now, but on my phone. For some reason, my computer is having issues. I don't know whether it's our network or what, but something's going on here. So I'm on the phone.
Okay, thank you. I saw that the strange number pop up, so thank you for identifying that.
Okay. One of the areas that we incorporate into every audit process for Loudon Water is part of our risk advisory services team. Those IT professionals help aid in our process because so many of the controls of the organization are within the IT environment. Unfortunately, both the audit principal and manager that assisted us with Loudon Water's process this morning are on other audit committee calls or on their way to other audit committee calls. So they did give me some information to share with you, and they wanted to let you know that they are available should you have any questions or want more information about their testing. But I'll go through the pieces that they provided in their process, a lot of which are standard that we do every single year of an annual process. And then there was also some additional layers of information and testing that they did this year that was specific to the pandemic and the changes because of the remote work environment. As always, they do update their understanding of general IT controls. This includes identifying key controls regarding IT governance and risk management. It also includes change management and general IT controls. The general IT controls are broad in scope, but it covers things such as password configurations, administrative access, identity access management, antivirus configurations, the patching process, and data backup configurations. The testing over these controls were performed without any issues or findings again this year. They also completed specific user access testing within SAP. We do this again on an annual basis. We select a sample of employees to test their user access. We added on this year some additional user access testing with the online banking systems, as well as the account payable network share drives. And as Brian mentioned, and we'll go to in more detail later, they did have one exception or one item that came up in their testing that has been resolved. There was one employee that had excess access to a network drive, but we'll go through that later. And then finally, because of the pandemic, because of the changes to the remote work environment, they did go through an in-depth understanding of Loudon Water's response to the pandemic, identifying any changes in key security controls that were made to provide expanded remote access. All in all, Loudon Water was well positioned to respond to these changes and adapted very quickly to them. And there were very little technical controls that required significant modification for that process to happen. So our IT and risk advisory services team were very impressed with that change in the process. And they did want to point out that they were impressed with the newly implemented controls of sending out periodic cyber awareness emails to reinforce the potential for cyber and phishing attacks within the IT, within the organization. And then the last item I want to cover just in the overview is, each year we look at a special section for Loudon Water, and as our IT department covered some of these areas within the IT systems and their understandings, our financial audit team also covered a number of them outside of the system. And we looked at a lot of process changes, many of them the same that we look at in the audit, but we tested them in much more detail. And we also looked at not only the approval process and the review functions of for those key controls, but we also looked at the retention of that documentation to make sure that it was sufficient and that the process was efficient for a true remote work environment. We do have one recommendation that came from this testing, and we'll go through that a little later in the presentation. If there are no questions there, if we can advance the slide to the next page, I will go through our required communications. As you can see here, these are the pieces that our standards indicate are important communications for us to have with those charged with governance. Our responsibilities with regard to the financial statement audit, that's outlined in our engagement letter that we present at the beginning of the process. But ultimately, through the engagement letter and through our opinion, it states that we are responsible for the audit and our opinion over the audit to ensure that the statements are materially stated. The financial statements themselves, the annual report that management presents, that is the responsibility of management. We also issued our planning communication at the beginning of the process that outlines some of the significant risk areas that we identify in the process. Excuse me. One of the changes that we added to that in the risk process this year was any changes to policies, procedures, and controls as a result of the pandemic. And we have tested those in detail this year. Going into the accounting practices, preferability of accounting policies and procedures, we have reviewed any policies and procedures that may have changed during the year. The adoption of new accounting policies. There was only one GASB standard that was adopted this year, and that was GASB 95. And that essentially was a postponement of all of the implementation of the GASB standards that would have been effective for this year. So essentially, for the most part, GASB's 83 through 93 have all been pushed back 1 year, with the exception of the lease standard that we've been talking about and waiting for years. GASB 87 was actually postponed for 18 months. So management will have a little more time to implement some of those standards and the changes. Significant unusual transactions. We did not identify anything this year where there might have been a lack of authoritative guidance or a consensus of accounting policy. As I mentioned, there are some new accounting standards, and they are attached to this presentation that will be upcoming for the organization in the years to come. And we will continue to work with management as they need help or assistance or guidance in implementing those policies and those changes. If you could advance the slide to the next page, please. I'll move into management judgments and accounting estimates. There are some significant estimates within Loudon Water's financial statements. It's important for the committee to be aware of these. We do review these extensively through the audit process to be ensured that the information that management has compiled is well documented, that it's reasonable, that it meets the standards for a supported estimate within the financials. The main ones for Loudon Water, the first being unbilled accounts receivable. These are the amounts that service has been provided, but that has not been billed as of December 31st. Based on the timing of the audit, as has been in the past, this estimate is not necessarily a significant estimate with unreasonable or unknown variables in the calculation because the first quarter has essentially come to a close as we're doing the audit process. So the finance team is relying on actual numbers to produce that estimate for the first quarter to put back into unbilled for 12/31/20. Depreciation expense. Depreciation is always an estimate. It's based on the useful lives, and we've detailed the different lives of the assets, buildings, the facilities, and machinery and equipment there for you. Again, some of these assets may or may not live as long as the estimates have been established. The fair value of the investment portfolio, those are estimates as well. They are based on the fair market values of those investment holders of the shares. The accrued compensated absences. This is a calculation based on multiplying the hours accrued by the pay rate for the employee at the time. There is an estimate of what could be used within a current period versus the long-term period, but that information is consistently applied from year to year. And the last one there is the employer pension and OPEB liabilities. But again, these estimates are based on actuarial valuations that are prepared on an annual or semi-annual basis for the authority. The basis of accounting, the financial statements were prepared on the assumption that the authority will continue as a going concern. So we have no issues or concerns specifically relating to whether or not the authority will not be around 12 months from now. In the audit adjustment section, there were 2 adjustments and 1 reclassifying entry that were made to the original trial balance during the course of the process. So we do ask for the trial balance early in the process to be able to plan and perform our risk assessment procedures. And there are some entries that fall through the system after we receive that trial balance. So we are required to give you that information, and those 3 entries are attached on the following page. But all in all, the net effect for the year was a $204,000 increase in net income from what was provided to us at the beginning of the process. And then we are not aware of any uncorrected misstatements that have not been posted to the financial statements. Okay, any questions so far?
Mr. Kelly has a question.
Jennifer. Yeah, hi, Jennifer. Thank you. Very, very, very thorough. Just a general question on these GASB pronouncements. There's quite a few of them coming in next year and in 2023. Any concerns from you about how these may impact Loudon Water?
No, sir, I don't have any specific concerns relating to them. You are correct. There's a number of them that come through in the next year or so. But there's a lot of great information available for the implementation of these standards. Many of them have implementation guides that have already been produced to be able to help organizations go through the process of implementation. The lease standard is the one that I think would be the most time consuming to implement, and it will be going through and evaluating all considerations for what could be a lease, what should be a lease, and if any changes should be made. So that process can be started now if it has not been already, to gather the information, to put things into a memo or into some type of documentation to retain. And we're happy to work with Brian and his team as they compile that information so that they're ready for a go live adoption at the end of 2022. But the other ones I think are going to be pretty straightforward. Beyond leases, I think the next one after that will have some consideration and might take a little bit of thought process will be the public and public-private partnerships. If there are any relationships either currently or in the future that could fall under that standard.
How about GASB 93, the replacement of interbank offered rates? I mean, I'm going through that as a banker, going to LIBOR to SOFI, so I'm just curious if that would have much of an impact on pricing and so forth.
I'm not aware of any significant change it'll have on the pricing. There will be changes, but a lot of that information, again, as you mentioned, will come through the banking industry to Loudon Water for them to make the changes, and I don't think it'll have a significant impact or a material change on the financial statements.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And they may be looking to you for advice on that one. I think you may have just volunteered your services.
Yeah. It's kind of a pain in the neck, but we have to do it. We've been doing it for a while, so we're over time we're transitioning over to SoFi. So not as bad as we at first thought. I don't think it will have an impact on swaps for sure, but we don't do a big swap business. So we're in good shape.
Good. Yeah, Gatsby has been busy for the last few years with a lot of changes, and they still have things on the horizon that we expect to come out in the next 12 months. You know, my general approach to the standards are take one at a time, identify the low-hanging fruit of those that will not have an impact on an organization, assess and document what may or may not have any impact, and move on from those, and then work the way up the ladder, keeping in mind the time frame of when the implementation is required. But the postponement this year really did give organizations a chance to breathe for all of these pronouncements that have been released over the last 18 months.
Ryan and his team are going to be busy.
Yes. So just real quick. We did start working on GASB 87, which is the leases, because that was postponed. So we had started our work on that. And what we've actually found is we think, I'm going to get my number wrong, GASB 96 is the subscription-based IT arrangements. And we actually think that will have a bigger impact on us than the leases from what we've gathered so far. And so we're just in the process of getting all the documentation and all of that right now so we can prepare for that. And as far as GASB 93, we have gotten some information from our partners at US Bank who handle our custody agreement. And so they've been keeping us involved in what they're doing as far as that.
Okay.
Okay, and then if you can advance the slide, the next 2 pages go through some of these pronouncements and their effective dates of when they need to be implemented. So you can advance maybe 2 more pages there. One more. These are the 3 journal entries, 2 journal entries, 1 reclassifying entry. All in all, had an impact of $204,000, which immaterial to the financial statements as a whole. But those are the changes for the year. And then if you turn to the next page of the slide, this goes into, we did issue a management letter, a recommendation letter. Again, as Brian mentioned, we did not classify these as material weaknesses or significant deficiencies, although there were a few things that we brought to management's attention for best practices and for the betterment of the authority going forward for their consideration. The first item there at the very bottom of this page is based on the information technology user access. As I mentioned with our risk advisory team, they specifically looked at some different areas this year because of the remote environment. They did identify only 1 employee who had access to a subfolder within the accounts payable department in those shared drives that was in excess of their job function. So that was brought to Mike's attention. It was quickly remedied, and so as far as we are aware, it's already been resolved and is no longer an issue. But we did look at a lot of different individuals within that testing and only identified 1. If you turn to the next page, then the top item on page 2 is the documentation and review procedures. This was outside of the IT system. The work that we did with the reconciliations, the reviews, the documentation, there were some areas that lacked the supporting documentation in an organized fashion, which I think stems from the remote environment. We didn't feel that the reviews were not conducted. And for many of the areas that we had additional questions, there was information, emails, there was some type of evidence, audit evidence to tell us that the review, the control, the function was completed. So that's why this is sitting down with just a control deficiency or a recommendation for improvement. We do think that those control features existed and happened, but this is more of a recommendation to make sure that the process is well documented and that the documentation for those reviews and approvals are stored and retained in a unified space. So for example, when there's a reconciliation that is prepared and reviewed by a second individual, documentation of that review function, that approval, is stored someplace. So when people like us come back in and ask, show me the preparation and the review of any type of reconciliation, that can easily be obtained and presented to us. So there was a couple of areas within the testing. We tested a lot of those throughout the year to make sure that the processes and the controls were still happening as they were pre-pandemic. So I think all of the functions happened. We just recommended some streamlining of those retention procedures. The next item there was within the oversizing reimbursement liability. Oh, I'm sorry, can you go back to the prior page? Thank you. Within our testing of the oversizing reimbursement liability this year, we did note some differences between the spreadsheets that are maintained between finance and the engineering department. Because of the size of the liability, we do detail test those annually. But looking at the different contracts and the different spreadsheets that are maintained, there were some small differences between them. So we just really recommend that the finance take a detailed review, to take a little time in 2021 in their spare time to look at these two and see if they can resolve some of those smaller differences and see if there are others that exist, just to tighten up that liability amount. I don't have any concerns that it's materially misstated in the financial statements. So again, it's not a significant deficiency. It's sitting down here for a detailed review. But I think because some of those differences did exist and they popped up in our testing, that it's probably a good time to reevaluate and review the overall liability. And then the last item there, we always follow up on prior year recommendations when they are presented. And one of them that fell from last year's audit was the inventory process and the having someone outside, independent of the inventory controls and handling process, be a part of either a test count or the physical inventory count. Because of the pandemic this year, management did evaluate the safety, the risk versus reward, I guess, if you will, of having that independent person involved in the physical inventory count. It was not done this year, and we are understanding of that process and that decision making. But again, we just wanted to report back to the committee that this wasn't fully resolved in 2020, but management does intend to implement this going forward.
Jennifer, Mr. Kelly has a question.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Mr. Kelly, I believe you're muted. Sorry, sir.
All right, thank you, Jewel. Jennifer, is it standard to have someone internally, not connected with the regular inventory responsibilities, do that count, or is it a more customary practice to have someone from the outside, from a firm unconnected to Loud and Water? It's okay to do it, but the inside is not part of the regular inventory process?
Yes, absolutely. Someone internal from the organization, okay, but someone who does not have responsibility for purchasing, for physical control, or for the review process of inventory. So typically that tends to fall with someone within finance, not in the accounts payable process, but someone within finance. But within the organization, I mean, it really could be someone from IT, it could be someone from engineering. There are different opportunities available to put that position in place. But based on the size of the balance of inventory, I wouldn't recommend you have an outside external party come in and look at the inventory or be part of that count. I don't think your inventory is significant enough to warrant that. But I do think it's a good control to have someone outside of the physical inventory control to test count at a minimum. Again, it doesn't have to be run by someone independent. They can be a part of the full physical count, or they can just come back behind and do test counts, just so someone independent of the process is involved in the process.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions there? The remaining part of this presentation that is attached is a copy of the representation letter that has been signed by Carla and Brian. And this is for the committee's reference so that you can see what they have represented to us at the end of the process. And that is all I have presentation-wise, unless you have any questions.
Any members, any questions in the committee?
No, none from me.
Okay.
Not at this time. Thank you.
Well, thank you. If you
Thanks, Jim.
have any questions throughout the year, we are available to the committee members throughout the year to review anything, to do any additional testing, or to answer questions as you may have them.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Jennifer, and thank you to your team as well.
Thank you.
Good job.
It's been great working with you for these past 12 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, been great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Good job.
I
Good
can,
job, Brian.
thank you. I'll provide a brief update on the status of YHB's recommendations and their findings. If you could go to the next slide, please. So the first one that Jennifer mentioned was the user access. As she mentioned, as soon as Mike and his staff were made aware of that, they corrected it. So that's no longer an issue. The next one was the documentation of the review procedures. We used to physically sign off on certain reconciliations. And as we moved to electronic, we started doing those email reconciliations for approvals. But as she mentioned, we didn't really put in place where we should store those records. So some ended up being stored in inboxes and some were saved to a local drive. And so we agree, and we're going to put in place and document a formal procedure for retention of these approvals. The next was the oversizing reimbursement liability. We agree that we need to do a deep dive into this and make sure everything agrees between finance and engineering. We've started that a little bit, and we'll have that completed by the end of 2021. Next slide, please. And then the final one was the inventory process. We do have that process in place and have full intention of implementing that at the end of this year. We identified a staff member in finance who is not a part of the procurement or the accounts payable process who will conduct a year-end audit with the inventory staff. If there's any questions about any of those, I'm happy to answer them.
Sounds good, Brian. Doesn't sound like we have any questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Kelly, can I just take a second to, I want to acknowledge the finance staff. I mean, I know all too well the amount of work and time and effort that goes into preparing for the audit. And then once the auditors are on site, no disrespect to Jennifer and her team, but it is a disruption that you go through every year. And Brian has done an amazing job leading the team through, Mike Beardsley and his team. And I want to give a shout out to Eileen. She is our accountant, and she is the person that cranks out all this information and works really hard to get us to this point. So, and also thanks to Jennifer, because she not only makes herself available to the board, she reports to the board, but she also is available to Brian and his staff, to me, pick up the phone, we need advice, and that's really valuable to us. So I just wanted to take a minute to just shout out to the team, to Brian and Mike, and also Sue Crosby and her team, who have the ultimate task of making the annual report look really good. So we'll cover that with the finance committee tomorrow, but thanks for letting me just take a second to shout out to my team.
I'll just add to that, Cara, I thank everybody. Great job. And doing it remotely, that's an additional burden to try to get that done remotely as well. And from one who has an organization who likes to have internal auditors crawling all over us all the time, I get and understand the disruptions. So rather frustrating trying to answer to findings and so forth, and making sure those findings are correct, and that that they're not something of concern. I feel like I'm spending 1 day a week trying to reconcile. So great job. Thank the team for that. Thanks for mentioning that, Carla.
Tara, if I can make a comment.
Yeah, Jim, please.
Yeah, thank you. Everyone has done a great job. This is my 5th year on this committee, and the detail that everybody goes into. There's one of the things that's always important to me is the security on our IT and in our securing our control system, and that every year has been included. And it's even more important when we see what's going on with several of the attacks. So I really appreciate this committee and all the staff that support it, and our auditor paying very close attention to those things. It's something that we need to keep out in front of. So thank you again very much.
So Brian, how's that gone? These phishing exercises with the employees so far, so good?
Yeah, it's good. Mike and his team send out a lot of emails, and so we get quite a few. Obviously, with especially our payroll, they get quite a few, and we're very scared, I guess. So we send a lot of emails back to Mike and say, I don't know if this is an actual scam or one that you just tested us on, but just to be aware that we're getting these emails. So. We've, over the years, we've put a lot of things in place with Mike's help, as far even online and offline procedures to double check before anything gets changed. We're very, very cognizant, and Mike and his staff do a great job, putting stuff out there to test us to make sure we're not getting fooled. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get emails that say, this is not a phishing exercise, and I have to reply, are you sure? Are you for sure? We have it set up so that I think you get 1 or 2, maybe 2. If you miss 2, it affects your performance at the end of the year, and it affects your annual increase. So it's taken very seriously, and that's knocked down a lot of these issues very quickly.
I would just
Mike,
add
you say something?
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Brian said. We send out these messages monthly and have for the last 4 or 5 years now, and I think we've kind of induced a state of paranoia in our staff, which honestly you need these days. You need folks to question even legitimate emails, and we do have folks at that point where they get attachments that maybe they weren't expecting, and they look at them closely. I'm in the loop on a lot of those, and I get messages from our staff about, hey, I got this. Is it real, or is it a phish test? And only a handful of actual attacks sneak through. Typically, the less sophisticated ones, actually, that don't have attachments and malicious links, are the ones that get through because they can get past our defenses. The ones that have malicious links and attachments tend not to get through our filters. So that's a good thing. But at the end of the day, we really do focus on that employee awareness part of it. And because it's been a long ongoing campaign and the finance team has been really looped into it, I think they're very aware. And we've had enough false scares, false positives and so forth that that I know it's something that's constantly on their mind. So I think it's a strong point of security for us.
All you have to do is look at Colonial Pipeline. See what happened to them.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, we've been tracking that closely. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. As I understand it, like that, what I at least read that one article said that they were behind in their Microsoft releases. So I don't know if they had kept things up to standard or current or not. But
I had read some of that. It sounded like some of the recommendations that had been made. They had an assessment done, and there were recommendations that were made about improving their cybersecurity defenses, and not all of them were followed. And that's one of the Achilles' heels, is not keeping things up to date, not patching systems, not doing regular vulnerability scans, and not having good backups in place. Those are some of the things that often go wrong in these attacks.
Well, we get 5 million reasons to do it now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Maybe more.
Yeah, maybe more. Yeah, who knows?
Yeah. But those exercises of phishing is really good for our staff and for us, not just for work, but also in our personal lives, because people go after your personal. And it's truly amazing the amount of stuff that gets through.
Absolutely.
And it's the human that has to decide, am I going to open that attachment or not? And I default not to a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else?
Not for me. Thank you.
The meeting? Thanks, Jim. Okay, Jewel, I think we're at the end, or I hope we're at the end. Nothing else
Yes, sir.
On the so I'm reading the agenda wrong.
Nope, just the adjourned meeting.
We don't have a next meeting, do we?
We do not, Brian. Is that correct?
No, we'll meet again next March to discuss the 2021 audit, and at that time we'll also present an update on the findings to make sure, to tell you that they were actually implemented.
So will we tomorrow's the finance committee meeting? Will we report to the finance committee results of the audit, or will we go right to the board?
So we'll provide an update, that the audit was completed, clean, unmodified opinion, and then we'll also present the annual report and talk about some of the highlights in there. And then the report will be presented to the full board for approval, so that we can then present or submit it to GFOA for their award of excellence in financial reporting.
Okay, very good. All right, Jewel, I'll take a motion to adjourn then.
So moved.
I'll second. Any opposed? Nope. And we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time this morning.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.